Hey there. So in this video, I want to just quickly go over the process for grading an assignment outside of how you do it in PowerSchool. I want to show you how you get the answers that you're then going to go and put into PowerSchool. So this is basically just a quick outline of the process. So you begin by providing rubrics to the students along with the assignment that tells them how they're going to be scored. The students complete the assignment, turn it in. The teacher, this is an optional thing, but I highly recommend that on the due date, that the teacher go in and just mark which assignments were collected and which assignments are missing in PowerTeacher Pro. And we'll look at how to do that in a separate video. Then, when the teacher sits down and actually grades the work, they will then score the assignment based upon the rubric that was given to the students. And that will then give you scores for each of the learning targets. Then you average the learning target scores, and you'll be able to use our conversion chart to turn that into a letter grade. And then that's what will get entered into PowerSchool. And then the assignment gets returned to the student with those scores already written on it. Now, using rubrics is going to give us consistency. Using this whole scoring process, rubrics, and then letting PowerSchool do a lot of the behind-the-scenes math for us, will ensure more consistency, more clarity. Students will have a better sense of how they're doing at any moment in time and how their grade is being determined. Feedback, rubrics are just an awesome form of feedback, and having real-time progress scores calculated by PowerSchool is another form of feedback that students and parents will get to help them understand how they're doing. The grading system is designed with the idea of fairness in mind. And then, obviously, rubrics provide a great way to document a student's score. It's a way of keeping track of that, documenting it, and making sure that the individual nuances of the student's performance on the various learning targets are all recorded through the rubric. Now, I made up an example of a rubric that I might use for the programming class that I'm using for all my videos here on this training. And so I kind of assume okay, it's my second unit of the year. I've already had several assessments on the first unit. You may remember, if you were watching some of the other videos, that the programming class only has 3 learning targets attached to it, and 2 of them are the ones that are typically used on projects and exams. So the assumption here is that by the time we're in Unit 2, students should already be fairly comfortable with the stuff we covered in Unit 1, and then they're learning the stuff in Unit 2, and that's really where the range of scores is going to be most dramatic. So I included in every single one of these the old topics from Unit 1, declaring variables and calling functions. So that there's kind of this reference back to the things they should also already be able to do. And then the things that I'm looking for in the newest assignment. So in this case, using if statements, generating random numbers, using arrays are the 3 main things out of the Unit 2 that I wanted students to learn. So a top score of a 4 means the student has demonstrated they're extremely comfortable with variables and functions, and that they're using proper use of if statements, random number variables, and utilizing arrays. And ideally, because that's very similar to number 3, on a level 4, students are using novel approaches to the coding challenges. So they're actually using their own thought process and debugging skills to come up with an approach to solving the problem that may not be the way that was taught in class. Right? So they're synthesizing new approaches out of the stuff that they've learned. That's like a 4. That's like the top of the tier. A 3 is students comfortable declaring variables and calling functions. They demonstrate proper use of if statements, random values, and utilizing arrays, primarily using the techniques already seen. So they're not necessarily stepping outside and using this in a way that they're able to synthesize new processes. They're just able to kind of do it. They understand the syntax. They know how it works, but they're not really doing anything new and creative with it. They're just kind of doing what they've already seen. A 2 would mean that they're able to declare variables and call functions, but they have some misunderstandings of if statements or arrays. I didn't include random numbers because there's not really a lot of misunderstanding that can happen with those, so I took them out. Oops. And then a 1 is the student is still struggling to declare variables and properly call functions. The student attempts to use if, random numbers, and arrays and scripts, but is struggling to use them properly or is struggling with their syntax. So a 1 kind of encompasses both struggling a bit with the current stuff, but they're also still showing they're struggling with the old stuff that they should have a better handle on now. And then a 0 is no evidence of understanding ifs, random numbers, arrays. Minimal understanding of the variables and functions at best is demonstrated. So that's kind of how I might break out my 4-point rubric in a way that the students would be able to understand, and I'd be able to communicate to them and say things like, well, you did a really good job declaring the variables and making if statements here, but the way you defined your arrays is showing some strong misunderstandings that we need to clean up. And that would allow me to then say, like, the student is at a 2 in all likelihood. You know, I might say that they're at a 3 depending on how much issues there were with the arrays. But again, rubrics allow us the way to share information with the students about their performance, including a little bit of written feedback to allow them to know, based on your expectations, how they did. So let's look at a couple of examples of doing calculations. Firstly, here's the chart that you should have received already in our grading system overview documentation that you'll be handed out. And so this is how we're turning the average of learning target scores into an assignment score. So there's 2 sets of numbers because it's a range. If the average comes out to be above a 3.75, but not more than a 4, then the student would get an A+. If it's above a 3.5 but not more than 3.75, they'd get an A, and so on. You'll notice that 3.25, 3.5, 3.75, all these numbers are repeated twice. This column has the equal sign in it, so if it's exactly a 3.5, it would be an A-, not an A, because a 3.5 is not above a 3.5. It's above 3.25, and it's less than or equal to 3.5, and so it's an A-. Okay, so let's just hop over and look at a few examples. So if there's only one learning target on an assignment, it's really simple. There's no averaging, there's no math that needs to happen. If the student got a 4, that translates to an A+. If they got a 3, it translates to a B. If they got a 2, it translates to a C-. A 1 translates to a D-, and a 0 translates to an F on the assignment. And all of that conforms perfectly with this. A 4.0 is A+, a 3.0 is a B, a 2.0 is a C-, and a 1.0 is greater than 0.9, but not more than 1.25, so that's a D-. Okay, so 2 learning targets. Add the 2 scores together and divide by 2. That's how you do an average. Then use the chart to find the assignment grade. So if the student got a 2 on one learning target and a 3 on the other learning target, that's a total of 5. Divided by 2 comes out to be a 2.5. And a 2.5 is one of those numbers that appears in this column. So a 2.5 would be a C+. That's what the student would receive on this assignment. If you have 3 learning targets, like a 2, a 3, and a 3, that totals up to 8 points. And then you divide by 3, because it's always divide by how many you've got. So 2 plus 3 plus 3 is 8 divided by 3 is 2.67. So now we have a number that's not on the chart exactly. So 2.67 is above a 2.5, but not more than 2.75. So a 2.67 would be a B-. And the last example. Suppose you got 4 learning targets. That's a bit excessive. I don't know how many people would have 4 learning targets on one assignment, but it might happen. So add the 4 together, divide by 4, and then look it up. So suppose we had a 2, a 4, a 3, and a 4. That averages out to, that adds up to 13 points, and 13 divided by 4 scores makes an average of 3.25. that is one of those numbers that appears right in this column. So we can look at 3.25 and say, oh, that's a B+. Okay, that's basically it for how you calculate and translate your learning target scores into an assignment score. In the next video, I'll show you how you actually enter all this information into PowerSchool.